able to run and be active inside. Students in music and band classes are going to be able to sing and play all of their instruments. Students will be able to eat and laugh together in the cafeterias. These small bits of school life are huge. They're a really, really big deal. I know we are all feeling hopeful that we can move out from under the shadow of the COVID pandemic this year. Last year was unbelievably challenging for almost everyone in public education, including students, staff, administrators, and we lost a lot of folks to retirement and resignation, leaves of absences, other districts, and even to other careers, which means there are a whole lot of new faces here in VSD, including our new superintendent. I'm hopeful that we can seize this opportunity in this moment to clearly define who we are as a district, a place where educators create safe, welcoming, compassionate, and diverse communities in which students feel empowered to be themselves. We need to be a district that commits to deep equity work and anti-racist practices, that supports and lifts up students and staff who are members of the LGBTQ community, who are members of color, or some other historically marginalized group. We need to be a district of true collaboration with meaningful ways for BEA, for our siblings, and OSEA, for VSD leadership, and for our students to establish genuine partnerships and decision-making processes that benefit our schools and communities. We need to be a district where we challenge each other every single day to bring our best for each and every one of our students. I want to thank Dr. Valderas for your email this morning. Your commitments to equity, to developing actionable plans for our district to become better, and communicating with staff about district priorities and decisions are very much appreciated. I'm hopeful that they will set a positive and impactful tone throughout this year. I also want to mention that our union is in the midst of negotiating agreements for licensed substitute educators in VSD. We know that substitutes help to keep our district running, provide continuity for our kiddos, and to ensure that our salaried educators can confidently lead their students in good hands. We're hopeful that we can come to an agreement soon that recognizes the value of these educators in our district. To our staff, I just want to say thank you for your continued commitment to our students and to making our district and this community a place to learn, to grow, and to thrive. To our students, we are so excited to welcome you back. And to our community, I just want to say thank you for your continued support. We are able to do our jobs better because of your trust in us. Let's have a great year, y'all.
Thanks, Lindsay. Next, we have Kirsty Sackman from OSEA.
Hello. Oh, right. I usually don't need a mic, so I was worried. Hello, good evening, school board. Dr. Valderas. Hello, Chair Covet. Thank you for everyone. I am Kirsty Sackman. I am a para 2 in one of our elementary special education programs, and I'm also currently the president-elect of our OSEA Classified Union. I'm just so happy to see everyone in real life, like to see your real faces here in person. This is a nice change. I just am excited. I'm going back to our building today for our first day of in-service, just planning for the kids. I was very happy to see all of our educator friends. But I'm really excited for next week. I want to see those happy little smiling kid faces, masked or not masked, you know, their choice. But I would like to follow up with what Lindsay was saying about getting back to some resemblance of normal. You know, we'll never go back to full normal, but just being able to be in school, go on field trips, hang out with their friends, not have to count how many people are at the table, or if, you know, wait, tell kids to count 5 seconds before they walk so that their friend has space to walk in front of them. Just have some people to play in the playground all together, not to have separate zones where one class gets the playground for a day. I'm excited. I love PE. I love to play at recess. Like, that's my jam. I'm all about it with the kids. I want spirit days. I want us to have fun. And we're getting pretty close. I would like to say also thank you to the VSD management and people on our board for all the hard work. We as classified signed our contract this summer. Yay. I know that we are very excited. Most of my board, we now have a year under our belt. Most of us are pretty new. So we're really excited to know what we're doing, kind of have some leverage and going back into what we know is our normal or close to. We are very excited at what we can do. Now that we have bargaining under our belt, we can focus back more into our community. We have hired so many classified staff over the summer. We are very excited. You know, there's still many spots to be filled, but we are hopeful to gain more staff, more training, more equity, and more inclusion collectively as staff. Because as staff, if we're supported, it's the best way to support our families and our community and our schools. Our board is just really excited to be here and to be diving back into life. And we thank you for all of your hard work, and we hope to chat some more about what else we can change and do this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. I want to start by noting for the public comment section that we have received 7 written public comments. Board members appreciate your comments and thank each and every one of you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. I think at this time, I'm just going to confirm with Diana, we don't have any people coming for public comment tonight. So I'm going to save everybody the preamble to those comments that we normally do. And we will move on to reports, starting with the superintendent's comments and Dr. Valderas.
Good evening, Board Chair Covet, Vice Chair Dr. Perez, and board members. It's been a very busy 2 months since I began my tenure here in the Beaverton School District. I have been meeting with students, staff, and community members, as well as area organizations to get a better understanding of our school system. The community has been extremely welcome. It's been it's great to be back home here in Beaverton. I know my spouse is very excited to be hanging out with her sisters. So again, just a really good time to be back. Last week, Mayor Beatty held a luncheon with elected officials from around the area for me to know and to help brainstorm how we can continue to partner together to support our students, families, and broader community. A few of my board member colleagues here were able to be present, and thank you for your time to attend with the lunch meeting. So I know it's tough for some folks that are working. Some areas of interest included continue to improve our alignment between our local school business community and our career technical programs, and working to support our students through community schools model and more mental health supports in partnership with community organizations. I look forward to this continued dialogue around these topics around our community, because again, like I mentioned to the mayor and other elected officials that were present, an excellent school district has an excellent community, and an excellent community has an excellent school district. So it's all hand in hand, those together. This summer has been a busy time of teaching, learning. Has been a busy time of teaching, learning, and enrichment. We're able to support our students in programming at 49 school sites. It's pretty impressive, 49 school sites. I know some of you were able to visit programs with the support of federal COVID relief dollars. We appreciate all the staff that were able to make that possible, from our drivers to food service staff, our nurses, teachers, our classified staff, and administrators. We served over 6,000 kids in those programs. The summer program was just incredible success, incredible lift by the staff, broader community. And again, as has been stated, it was fun to see these kids back having a good time. Now the quarter, and I'm as excited as the association leaders have stated. It's next week. We've been prepping for this, deep cleaning, doing all the work that we can do. Today we welcome back our teachers and our certified staff, and next week comes the exciting day again when kids actually come through the door. Some of our students will be new to our district, starting kindergartners or newly moved to Beaverton, and we welcome all kids and all families. Some of our staff are also new to the system. As we prepare to start the school year, we welcome 801 new staff who have accepted positions in our district since July 1. So 801 new staff into our school system. That includes 221 new classified staff, 38 new administrators, 542 new teachers and certified specialists, 258 of which are newly hired into the school system, and the rest moving internally to new positions. We're glad to have them working with us to support our students to learn, grow, and thrive. Again, that's a pretty impressive number of people to come in. So again, we're excited to have them have the opportunity to be able to have them call Beaverton their district of choice. And we're going to continue to make it possible for us to retain them. Now that we have them, we got to retain them. So that's one thing that helps Pat and my staff. Once we have them, we have to retain them. Because again, it's as I stated earlier, this last 4 years of COVID have been really difficult. Again, we are in our 4th year of COVID. So want to make sure that, and having to address COVID related issues, staff, students, and community are wary of the topic, but it's still very prominent in our decision-making process and needs to be. You will hear more from staff tonight to address this matter. I want to thank the school board for your engagement and leadership in Beaverton in the recent years. The most difficult time I've had in my 33-year career. This has been the most difficult time. I had no gray hair 3 years ago. And no gray hair 3 years ago. Our work here is the most important work. It's the guide to our future, and our future are our kids. We look forward to the community that comes together and circles around the Beaverton, the potential that Beaverton has, it always has been. It's been, as I've stated time and time again, this is the best school district in Oregon. I chose to come back to help lead with you the best school district in Oregon. With our association partners, we're going to continue to make it the best school district in Oregon. So thank you, and let's welcome 22-23.
Thank you, Dr. Balderas. Next up, we'll have Dr. Balderas again with the superintendent's entry plan.
It'll be a little bit quicker. So as this is the 3rd time I think the board's seen this, but I want to make sure the community understands the transition plans as we get through. These entry plans are documents are really just for me to get a really solid assessment of the overall school system. And really 5 goals, as I'm not going to read the goals to you, they're in your board packet, but to really make connections with our community, with our partners, with our staff, with our kids, to understand what's working well and where are areas of wondering or areas that we can look to our improvement. But the first really phase is really listening and learning. I joke with staff often that we don't tear down the fences before asking why they were there to begin with. So, and that's something I learned a long time ago. It just take our time, be patient, and looking at the systems that are currently present to see what we need, what wonderings we have about the current systems. Reflect back on data, again, through all the listening and learning that I'm doing, is to reflect all the positive things that we're doing in Beaverton, and again, those areas of wondering, but to ensure that we move forward, that guides that information to a collective vision that's going to lead to a strategic plan that guides our efforts for the next 3 to 5 years. And that's going to be, again, the wraparound that support that I'm getting from you as a school board, because you're going to be heavily involved in that plan. So by the end of the year, we'll have an actionable strategic plan with metrics that are very transparent to the community, to our partners, to our staff, to our students, to our parents, to make sure that we're held accountable to what you want us to do and what the community expects us to do. That's what gets me excited. Again, we are at the cusp of coming off a difficult, again, 4 years, but the next 3 to 4 years, 5 years, I would say it's going to be just as difficult, because we've had kids that have lost time and space. They've gone further behind, and some of our students go further. The student furthest from educational justice, the student furthest from educational justice are those kids that all the research says are being furthest behind right now. And we have to make sure that we double our efforts to ensure that we have accelerated learning for these students. And that's the work that we're going to be doing in the next few years. I'm excited to do that work with you. Again, I'm not going to review the whole strategic, my whole action plan, but you've seen it before, but it's here in your board packet and with an executive summary up front for the community to see. So if there's any questions, then we're happy to answer.
Questions from the board? Okay, thank you, Dr. Balderas. I think great entry plan, and we had an opportunity to look at it at the work session, so I think everybody's feeling very comfortable with it. The next item up is our return to school update with Dr. Cordy and Dr. Hudson.
Good evening, Superintendent Balderas, Board Chair Collette, members of the board. Dr. Hudson and I are here this evening to give you an update on the return to school. And so our focus for this part of the board meeting is to really share with you the COVID-19 protocols and the updates relative to those. We have reconstituted the COVID-19 advisory team. It is under the leadership of Dr. Hudson. And we've really identified members for this team who represent all the various parts of our district in different departments. And we also wanted to be sure that the advisory team was not so large that we couldn't be nimble and respond when we needed to whatever issues might arise. I want to just really reiterate that advisory team is truly that. They will be making recommendations to cabinet, and Dr. Hudson will attend cabinet meetings to share that information, to receive input from cabinet. Ultimately, of course, with Dr. Balderas being the decision maker at any and all points along the way. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Hudson.
Good evening, Dr. Balderas, Chair Collette, and the Beaverton School Board. It's good to see you all in person. It's been almost 2.5 years, so good to see you. I'm going to go ahead and talk through this presentation. There'll be 3 different areas. There's ongoing practice, previous practice, and new practices that I'll be identifying as we go through. So starting with COVID-19 testing, this is really all an ongoing practice. So we will continue with our diagnostic testing on site at our school sites for staff and students who have symptoms consistent with COVID-19 or from known exposure, and ultimately anyone who is ill, we will offer them a test if we have parental consent. Students and staff who are at home and maybe develop symptoms when they're at home, they can arrange to come on site to get a test in their car, so they can still have access to that testing. We did discontinue our central testing site in June because we're not having multiple people coming in. I think that had to do with the accessibility of test kits. And then lastly, in June, we discontinued our OHSU COVID screening program. I want to touch on this one a little bit. We did a pretty extensive review with those individuals who were involved in managing the program. I also had a pretty active role in that. There was a pretty consistent frustration from family members who experienced false positive tests. So we had several times where notifications were sent home that a student was positive for COVID and they in fact were not. And so then we would have to backtrack that. There was also quite a bit of managerial requirements. So it was taking significant staff time to organize the test kits, to then get them sent home and then to receive them back, and then to coordinate with OHSU. And then we saw a pretty significant decrease in participation by students in the spring. Families just kind of quietly opted out. And so we were still then producing lots of materials that were coming in, and parents were not officially resigning from the program, but they were not engaging in the program. So we decided at the end of the year that we were not going to move forward with that program this fall. And really that is because we would prefer to have our staff focus their time on testing students and staff in our buildings who are exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19 versus dedicating staff time to trying to find out if someone is asymptomatic with COVID. So the next area again is face coverings. So again, at all times, disposable masks are available for staff or students in our district facilities. Staff working in health rooms and isolation rooms are also strongly encouraged to wear face coverings, but we're actually requiring them to do that now. We got some updated information. But also we want to make sure all that PPE is still available. So we have a whole bunch from the spring and we're renewing that as needed. In times of low transmission, masks are not they're recommended, but not required. But we do have access to that, as I mentioned. And then additionally, in times of high transmission, we will notify the school community that there is high transmission. And there'll be a letter that goes home and it'll recommend the use of masking. However, masking will not be required. And then lastly, following COVID-19 positive tests, staff and students are encouraged but not required to wear masks on days 6 through 10 when they return. Isolation. So this is when we look at isolation. So when the staff and students test positive for COVID-19, they need to isolate, not quarantine. So again, they're not having any interaction with others for 5 days, starting from the date the symptoms began. And that remains the same. I think that's been our current practice. And then additionally, like I said before, they are encouraged to wear masks on days 6 through 10 when they return. So the other thing that we have are isolation rooms. So one of the things that we learned in the pandemic was there are actually policies and procedures that were in place, and it helped us remember that those things are in place. One of them being isolation rooms, and that in fact, we need to have a separate space for ill students and non-ill students who need treatment, health treatment. Maybe they need to get their medication or something else. So we are continuing to implement plans at the school sites to make sure that students who are ill can be isolated from students and staff who are not ill. So cohorts, it helps us to at the elementary level, single grade level classroom. So like a first grade class would be a cohort, or any of our special education specialized programs that are listed up there, they would be a single cohort. Then at the middle and high school level, it would be individual grade levels, so 6 or 9, or it would be whole schools. You know, if the whole school was in high transmission and you were seeing rates spread dispersed among the grade levels. And then in particular, then we have a narrow focus at middle and high school for some very specific specialized programs where those students don't mainstream out of their classrooms, so they're pretty contained in that environment. And then our community transition program classrooms, we would be looking at those as cohorts. So this is, you know, student instruction and absence reporting. So if a cohort of students is recommended to transition to quarantine, not isolate, but to quarantine as a cohort, is recommended by Washington County Department of Health and Human Services, that cohort will transition to temporary remote learning for those 5 days. It may not be a full 5 days, depending on when the timeline falls, but it would be, students would be quarantining for up to 5 days. The teacher will continue to have 1 day to prepare for that transition. So that will become a non-instructional day for the cohort. And then the teacher will start teaching online with the students. If the cohort's teacher is unable to teach because they're ill, which has happened this year, we will provide a sub for that. So the students will still have access to virtual instruction during their quarantine time, but through a substitute. And procedures for cohorts in quarantine, they're going to remain the same as we would for students who are at school. So if they attend online virtual learning, they're marked present. If they do not attend, then they are marked absent.
I just want to give you some time here. You're a little less than 5 minutes.
Okay. Is that
We can add more time to the agenda.
okay? I think we'll be good.
We're learning this time thing as we go.
Okay. So really, I just wanted to be clear about what our new definition is. So at the school level, a definition of high transmission would be that 30% or more of the the students are absent, with at least 10 of the students and staff being absent. But those absences have to be directly related to symptoms like the flu or COVID-like symptoms. So we did have times last year where we had high absentee rates at a school, and I did some work with that school to, dive in and say, why do you have such a high absence rate at community school? And they were not COVID related, so we had that conversation. And then the cohort level, for high rate of transmission would be 20% or more absenteeism with at least 3 students and staff being absent. So really looking at those as our thresholds, and those were given to us by Washington County. Our next one is that, our prior practice was that we would notify anytime someone tested positive in the school. We notify families and staff. Many of you probably got multiple messages every day. Away from that, and we would only send out notification if the school was at the level of high transmission. That students and staff are testing positive, so we only want to alert parents where we're at a point that we're at high transmission. The other thing is, as you know, we had the COVID dashboard. Chair Collette, you were actively involved in looking at that as well. We are going to discontinue that use. The data was often out of date and not accurate, and led to more confusion than it did for help. Cohort quarantine. This is a change. So in our previous practice, we didn't have, as a school, as you know, in school district, we were operating off of developing our own guidelines around when did we shift a class to temporary remote learning. We actually used much of the thresholds that have been defined by Washington County. But our new practice now would be that we would wait to initiate a quarantine of cohort only when Washington County Department of Health recommended that. So they're saying they would like us to pause on us initiating that and waiting for them, because they have them more information, and then we'll come forward and make a recommendation for us. They won't require us to do it, but they will recommend it at that. I talked a little bit about student instruction when they're in the cohort quarantine. This is a little bit different about a student who is in COVID-19 isolation. Our previous practice is when a student was out of school and they were in isolation, COVID positive test, they had access to what we call, and so they could then log on online and continue with this teacher who is there. The new practice this year will be that students who have to isolate will no longer have a quarantine, but they'll just work like they would with their teacher if they were absent for any other reason. And then we had also a very different attendance rating around how we mark those students absent. They will be marked absent due to illness if they're not in school because they have to isolate. Moving on to physical distance. So, we had this idea of practicing maintaining 3 feet of distance. And if you had gone into any of our schools, you saw very elaborate cafeteria plans. And then if we were in high transmission, we would recommend, but didn't quite require a transition to online. But what we're moving forward to is that we are no longer requiring distance to adhere to social distance. CDC has come out with new guidelines on that. We're just waiting for ODE as well. So I'm not requiring that. And then additionally, what we're saying is in a time of high transmission, we would not move an event or extracurricular activity to a virtual situation. We would maintain in person, but we would make every effort to, maintain space and encourage individuals who are participating to wear masks. And then lastly, we are in the process of all the schools had to create a COVID-19 management plan. So they've all got those done. We did a lot of work centrally to centralize that plan for them. And then each school had to do individual planning for how they were going to address issues of equity in terms of students who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. They have a lot of absence issues, those kind of things, as well as really thinking about the process about how they're going to communicate if they are in a point of high transmission.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. Any questions from the board? Becky? And then Covet?
Thank you very much for that in-depth report, and I just want to say welcome, Dr. Corey, to your first full-fledged school board meeting. Welcome to the district. In the past, and I did see quoted throughout here, you used the authority to be the Washington County Public Health. We know in the past, sometimes we got conflicting information from the Oregon Health Authority, from Washington County Public Health, maybe even ODE. I saw ODE quoted there at the end, asking for a plan from every school. So I just want to know, going forward, if whatever we may be facing, who will be our guiding authority when we are making locally based decisions?
Okay, so we will be looking at our local public health authority. So even when the Oregon Department of Education made the Ready Safe Schools Learners, the RSFL document, it often deferred to the local public health authority, which is Washington County Health and Human Services. So we were always deferring to them based on that. So they're taking a little bit more of an active role, which I believe is because some of the impact of the pandemic has kind of dropped a little bit for them. So they feel like they can be more actively involved in giving us guidance. So often ODE will come out with guidance from there, which they then work with the health authority around. But they always then say you have to work with your LPHA, your local public health authority. So we will continue to work with them. If we get conflicting information, then we often then give that information to Washington County so they can digest it and come back and say, okay, based on OHA and ODE, now we're recommending this. So we have regular meetings with them to keep them updated on what we find out.
Just a quick follow-up question. We also found ourselves in conflict that so many of our employees don't necessarily reside in Washington County. They may reside in one of our other tri-county or even in the state of Washington, who may have different. So how are we going to make sure that we manage that as well, that our employees may be in different counties than where our schools are located?
So that is a really great question, because throughout the pandemic, we have had that as an issue that has come up. We have always held to Washington County recommendation, because that is where employment is. So the employees had to kind of look at what their rules are in where they live, but ultimately here in our county, we would follow our county guidance, and then we make sure they're aware of that. So high transition, and like the Washington County is in high transition, they make recommendations for mask wearing, we would let them know. And then we would hope that if they're living in Multnomah County and they're in high transition and they've made recommendations to wear masking, that they would wear a mask. But again, there's a lot less requirements than we've had this whole time. So it really is, and I think the CDC has clearly moved to it's up to you and you can choose what you want to do for yourself. And then the other agencies are following suit with that.
And then Susan?
Hi, good evening. Thank you for all this information. As a parent, I was using the OHSU testing piece, and I know that several parents and community members have asked us about that. And I understand from what you've explained to us in a couple different ways that we are choosing not to go with the OHSU testing at this time, because we will be having the support in schools where our parents and our students and staff will have the availability of getting a test there if any symptoms were to arise. So thank you for clarifying that. And then one of the pieces I was thinking about is how can we as parents inform the school about our kids getting a positive COVID test at home, right? So what I would do as a parent would be called the attendance line. And so over the last year, we were working on trying to figure out our attendance line in Spanish, because currently it's still in English, and the information we're sharing is in English there. And it's kind of different in each school. If I go to Parent Square, what I would do is I go to Parent Square, attendance line, and then it would give the information that you're sharing with me as a parent, and then I would leave my kid's ID number, and you tell me what I need to leave, and I leave that information, and if they have a positive COVID test, I'll let you know then. But we still haven't cleared that up and allowed for, maybe if we just add in parent square a Spanish line, or because currently you have to figure out how to call the school and then press 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 if you spoke any other language. So I know that we were still working on that. It's been a year, so hopefully we'll figure that out soon. A question as a parent too for me is if do my children have to take get a negative COVID test before they go back to school? Are we requiring that, or will they be? So I would keep my kid home, and then sometimes it's like 5 or 6 days and they're still getting a positive COVID test. And so it said 5 days, and then they would wear a mask at school. So I was wondering about that piece.
So, Dr. Perez, I'll start with the part about the attendance line. So yes, if a student tested positive, and I would also say if a staff member tests positive, if a student tests positive for COVID-19, that they should call in and report on the attendance line. And we still have the language in this line that says, if your student has tested positive for COVID-19, please let us know so we can follow up. I need to do a little bit more research about where we are with the attendance line with our IT department. So let me do some research and I will get back to you about that. And then in terms of, okay, the next question was about if they have to have a negative test. They need to be fever-free and they have to have isolated, but they can come back to school even if if they're still testing positive, because the requirement is that they have isolated for 5 days and then they can still return. So both of those are pretty much for staff. They're not required a negative test upon return.
Just to follow up on that one. So then, like, for example, in my case, I had it for 15 days, and I know that we drop kids after 10 days. And so, do we have anything where if it's been your kid's positive for a while and you're at home, and I'm like, I still don't want to send them home. I don't want to send them to school because they're still positive and I'm not getting a negative COVID test, right? So what's our process for that 10-day drop if our kids are still testing positive?
So if the parents selects to keep their student home, they will, based on the regulations by the Oregon Department of Education, on that 11th day, even though they're absent due to illness, we do need to drop them from our rolls. So I think that's the continued messaging for families is I understand that risk and that concern, but that ultimately what we've heard is that students are safe to come back on day 6.
So it sounds like that's an ODE thing, the 10-day drop. It's not something that we as a district can change, the 10-day drop.
Correct.
So okay.
We're over time right now. I'm gonna put 3 more minutes on here and we'll go to Susan. And then we'll do a wrap after that.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very lovely to see both of you. Dr. Corday, welcome to the school district. So my question is about vaccinations and the fact that we're hopefully going to see boosters for the Omicron. And I'm wondering if there's the possibility, if that is the case, I know we all have these ifs, if we might be offering that at some school locations, local locations, how to make it convenient for families and teachers.
Yes, I know that Dr. Mead in the operations department has really just been working closely with Virginia Garcia. And our plan is really to market through our community partners that give us that and market heavily so that we can really traffic people to those destinations. Dr. Mead and his team did a wonderful, fantastic job of having vaccine clinics. But it was definitely a lot of work to get that done. And not that we don't want to have that available for our students, but as we are also seeing a waning interest in that, the effort would probably be best for us to partner with our community partners. And Dr. Mead, if you have something to add.
And we got, Anita, you have a question? I think this will be our last question, unless board members. Okay.
Thank you very much for this information. This is really good. My quick question is, we are dropping the, access to the tutors when we are quarantined, or what are we doing so that we make sure that kids don't fall behind a lot more? Is there anything special that we're doing for that?
So, one thing I do want to talk about the tutors that we had, what we did find is when we moved from the 10-day isolation period to the 5-day isolation period, it was so in a lot of cases, students may only miss 1 day of school instead of a full 10 days of school, because depending when their symptoms arose, that kind of landed where how many days they were out of school. So we didn't really have a lot of use for it in the spring because a student might only be out for 1 day. So really what that is, in each school in their plan, they're supposed to look at if they have a student who's consistently out with COVID, or they're out for several days, like Dr. Perez noted, that school team, their behavioral health and wellness team is following up with that student and family. And then our nurses are still going to continue to be alerted when there is a positive case so that they can follow up. And so really saying, hey, you're out, here's how you can access your resources. So really, we are at a point that we're going to be living with this, illness in our community. And so really shifting to much like we do when we have cold or flu season and trying to help support students and families with that.
So if I heard it, like behavioral and wellness team, and then the nurses are the first would be able to reach out to the parents.
It may also be the teacher who reaches out to them because the student is in there. It's a little bit more complex for our secondary students who have multiple teachers, right? But really what we will continue to advocate for parents and figuring out, and I think Parent Square is a really great tool, is how we can have that two-way communication between the teacher and the family when the student is out about missed assignments. The nice thing is at secondary level, most assignments are on Canvas, so the students can access that when they're not there.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the really thorough report, and we will hear more as the school year goes on. Next up, we have Dr. Mead with the School Resource Officer Program Review Update.
Good evening, Superintendent Valderas, School Board Chair Covet, and school board members. Nice to see you this evening, and all in person. Nice to see you. This is intended just as an update following the presentation of sea changes SRO report to you at the work session on August 8th. Following that work session, Dr. Valderas instructed staff to move forward with an internal review in terms of the recommendations that were put forward in the sea change report. That group is gathered one occasion, and we will now continue to meet every Wednesday moving forward until we come to a final report for the October 24th school board meeting. But in that report, there are several areas in which we're concentrating on. None of these should be a surprise or aren't a surprise as they were included originally in the document with sea change. But most importantly, we're taking a look at the behavioral health and wellness, restorative practices we currently have in our building, and I think some factors of are we applying those equally across our system? I think those are some of the questions that we've got to answer and delve deeper into. Relationship building at the student level as well as our adult level. We've had a lot of isolation over the last 2 years and the implications of that. Mental health first aid, that comes in multiple ways. It comes from classroom teachers, not just behavioral specialists, or somebody in a specific field. We've got to be taking a look at all students and staff in an ongoing manner. Positive identity and peer relations. We've got a lot of work to do. You heard Superintendent Valderas speak to the fact that we have had kids in isolation for 2 years. We've got room to grow. We've got significant efforts that we need to go forward. And in essence, bring kids up to speed, if at all possible. And part of that's socializing. They've been in isolation for a long period of time. So what's that look like for us as a school district? As we take a look at our MOU, we had 3 MOUs with 3 different agencies and aligning those MOUs. And what does it look like in terms of practice and most importantly, to help inform their practice and our administrators' practice of the use of an SRO in our schools. To improve communication, and that's just not inward with our staff, it's also with our agencies, but most importantly to our community as a whole. We certainly saw through the Sea Change report a lack of knowledge of what SROs do and what they're charged to do within our schools. Why is it we would choose to engage with them? And what is it that they're charged to do and provide support to in our schools? Trainings for all levels of our school staff, and that's going to come in multiple forms. We talk often about administrators. We need to go significantly deeper. So what does that look like and where are we moving with that? And then ultimately data collection and reporting. Reporting back to you as a school board, reporting out to our community, and what does that look like? And it shouldn't be on an annual basis. It needs to be in somewhat of an ongoing basis. So actually identifying what's working and where we need to continue to improve. In addition to is the items I listed here, we're in the process of going all of these factors right now, taking a look at what current practices are. And we've got a lot of great practices in place. As you as a school board know, we've been paying attention to our mental health of our students and staff for a long period of time. But again, what does that look like in a concerted to ensure that we're aligning those resources in a K through 12 system? And then you balance that with those who are serving. We've got a number of adults who serve our kids, not only classroom teachers, but classified employees and administrators. So with that, we're developing some recommendations that we'll be making to Superintendent Balderas ultimately. And those recommendations will be certainly part of Sea Change, but I would also say we're going steps further. So for example, nowhere in the report was much mention about our campus providers. We have 19 providers that we have before our school. The service to them. They are many times first on the scene of an incident. What does that look like in terms of dealing with students? How do we gather information? And more important, what's a follow-up to ensure that support is there for their role? Student supervisors, again, another position, and assistant principals. We talk a lot to administrators and we usually put them into a bucket of principals. How does that then go into our system? That knowledge base go with our assistant principals too. So carving out time to spend time with them to ensure we're delving deeper. And then ultimately providing that support to staff at the building level. It's going to be a multifaceted approach. Some of those things will be a nice surprise to you. Others will be a nice reminder of a lot of good practices that Beaverton have had in place for a number of years. So the bucket is just a matter of what is it that we've got and how is it we continue to support, but more importantly, and ultimately move forward so that we can actually have the best results for kids. And that is not only relationships with our SRO, but our community as a whole in the understanding of the role of an SRO in our school district. So with that, happy to take any questions that you may have, but ultimately we'll be having a report back to you by October 24th. I believe I am scheduled for an additional update probably at the beginning of October to you as a school board.
Questions for Dr. Mead? And I think we've got about 10 minutes here for questions. Okay, Susan?
Pretty fast, I promise. Carl, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Appreciate all the hard work that's done in your group with this. My question is, how is this coordinated with the city of Beaverton? And how does the report that was given, the same report given to the city of Beaverton affect what's happening in our district?
The report that the city of Beaverton received is the same exact report that we did here. So our work is going to be working directly with the agencies in which serve our district. And that's going to be the Beaverton Police Department, Hillsborough Police Department, and the Sheriff's Office. Actions the board takes, the city council takes is a separate piece at this point in time. And the relationship that's been established with the Beaverton Police Department. I meet with SROs on a regular basis. Rick Fuente, our public safety officer, meets with our SROs on a weekly basis. So those exchanges happen on an ongoing regular basis. I know Dr. Balderas is also met with the chief of police and city manager and the like. And so those will continue to happen.
Ogana?
And for my mind. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. The question I have for you is, in your reviews and, while you're looking at, how, I mean, the recommendation given to us by CCH, are you also looking at how to mitigate, disproportionate, disciplines and treatments? Because that's the huge main concern that I have around the SRO program. I don't know how we're going to implement that program, if at all we are going to implement, without looking at the disproportionate treatments that some of our students are receiving. That's one of my major concerns. So are you also looking at how to mitigate that?
Ultimately, the answer is yes. That will not be completely done by October 24th. That is something that will continue to be ongoing as we engage in those relationships. I would also say Dr. Hudson's team has been working extensively over the last several years with regard to those practices. So what is it that we are owning as a school district and really moving forward with restorative practices to ensure that our students are whole, in essence, not feeling disowned and excluded from our organization, but more importantly, how is it we can actually bend those fences and move forward there? Definitely some assurances in place. There was one of the recommendations that was in the CJ report was to ensure that our SROs are not involved in the discipline of our students. They're not engaged in that. That's not part of their existence in support of our schools. The discipline needs to be administered by our administrators within our system, so that we have those clear lines defining our practices as school board or school district administrators, and clear lines of what that is for an SRO. But a great question, and one that we will continue to take a look at and make sure that we're taking a look at disproportionality. Thank you.
I had one of the I heard you named many different pieces that you'll be working on in that project and developing this the recommendations. And one piece I think I missed was the training that will, what kinds of training will they be getting? So if we were to keep SROs, what kind of trainings would they get? In the report, it was very specific that our LGBTQ2SIA+ students did not feel safe and comfortable and had some negative interactions, as did our female students, in reporting some issues. And so that would be something I would hope that would be addressed, and whether it's training, whether it's practices, or both. I do appreciate having those clear, defined, practices of when would they be called, why would they be called, and very clear understanding of impacts of when they are called on our students. The other piece, you were saying that we will be meeting every Wednesday, so there'll be a team of meeting. And I'm wondering how, you don't have to answer this now, but I'm just like, one of my curiosity around the inclusivity of that group that will be meeting to plan this, or if it's a smaller group, and then how will there be input from, the mental health department, or the, all the different people that come into contact and support our admin or our students and that. So.
Great question. Definitely, it's a smaller group at the present time. It's not intended to be exclusive, and there will be outreach from that group to extended parties. Part of what we want to be able to do is really concentrate and take a look at where's we actually have existing practices that are best practices in place in any of these areas, and what are the added pieces that we need to put in here. And part of that will be outreach to the experts in the field to make sure that we've got a very inclusive plan. It's not going to be perfect, I will tell you that now. So we will have a plan, we will move forward, but I promise you we will need to continue to hone that plan. This is not a one-time and done. We're going to learn as we continue to move forward. So what does that look like? What is it we continue to do? We also asked about training. That's not all been defined. So I'm giving you a big blanket. Yes, there will be significant training throughout the system. What that looks like today, I do have.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Thank you, Dr. Wayne. And just to recap next steps, at this point, we've received the report from C-Change. City Council received that report. And we're going to be getting the operationalization of those recommendations in October. And then after that, we have a discussion here at the school district. We'll be bringing that forward to the City Council. So next up, we have a local option levy update with Ms. Delp and Ms. Bailey Shaw.
Thank you, Superintendent Balderas and Board Chair Colette. I'm Carrie Dahl from the Chief of Staff, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's my first board meeting. It's a pleasure to see everybody in person. The board voted on August 8th to place the local option levy renewal on the ballot in November. That would maintain the same tax rate, which is $1.25 per $1,000 of assessed value, and will continue to support the funding of teachers in Beaverton, currently funding 280 speakers a year. If the levy were not renewed, we would no longer have that funding, and the district would need to make equivalent cuts to 286 teachers. The district can't advocate for or against any ballot measure or candidate, but is obligated to provide clear information to the community about what is going to be on the ballot. So Ms. Bailey Shaw is going to provide some information just about the district's communication plans for that, that informational, that neutral information going forward.
Hey y'all, good to see you. So once we've developed some of the language, and right now it's being looked at and reviewed by the Secretary of State. Once the language is reviewed, then we get our feedback, and then we'll move forward with these initiatives. So first, we're going to be creating and publishing a levy renewal webpage. We're also going to be creating and posting a levy renewal explainer video. And it's going to be similar to the one that we did for the bond, but it won't be quite as long because it's not as a complicated issue as the bond was. We'll be creating posters for each of our 53 physical school sites. They're scheduled to go out the second or third week of September. We're in the middle of that right now. We'll be creating explanatory flyers, and they'll be distributed to all our elementary school students, probably in mid-October. We'll be doing mailers to voters. And then in October, we'll begin the informational posts on social media. That is what the district is working on at district level. And then at the school level, we're really going to be relying on our principals to be the key communicators with educating our parents and neighbors about the levy. They'll be sharing information at back to school nights, at principal coffees, at PTO and PTC meetings, in their weekly newsletter, and then via Parent Square message in October. In terms of the community, Dr. Balderas has a superintendent listening session that's already scheduled for October 25th at a little high school. Everyone is invited to come, learn more, ask questions. So we'll be talking about the levy then. And then I'll also be reaching out to our media partners regarding coverage of the ballot measure, again, similar to what we did with the bond. In terms of the board involvement, here's where the ears perk up. What do I need to do, right? So please consider attending the meetings for the schools that you represent. Again, there'll be PTO and PTC presentations. And we'll also be setting up meetings with community organizations and neighborhood groups, similar to what we did with the bond. Board members can present at those meetings, and they can use the levy renewal video if they choose. So we'll make sure that you have that available. So that's the work so far. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the board? Okay, well, I'm looking forward to joining you at some PTO meetings in the future here. And thank you for the clear information. We appreciate it. Right, we're moving on to the part of the evening where we're going to do discussion items. And our next one is the Educational Equity Advisory Committee that came out of Senate Bill 732. And we have Ms. Dell, Mr. McCreary, Dr. Zavala, and Mr. Schofield.
You're passing.
And we've got 15 minutes for this part here.
There's two lines running on the agenda, so Mr. Schofield will be coming up next. So
Sorry.
it's all right. We have a surprise presentation. So thank you. Yes, the 2021 legislature passed Senate Bill 732. which calls for every school district in the state of Oregon to develop an educational equity advisory committee. Now, Beaverton already had an equity panel. It was formulated a little differently. It was a policy advisory group to meet some of the requirements. But the district is looking to move forward and reconstitute the equity committee to really be aligned well with what the intent of the legislation is. And my colleagues here will provide an update about what is moving forward.
Thank you. Good evening, Board Chair Colette, Superintendent Balderas, and board members. Happy to give you an update on where we're at with the Equity Advisory Committee. As Ms. Della told you, we've learned that our ability to use the task force over the past few years has really informed our work going forward. So that was a positive learning. We're in the process right now of engaging in a more authentic outreach and engagement than we were worried that the September 15th deadline was going to allow us to do. So we're going to do to the community, including task force members who had served on the task force in the prior 2 years, to see about interest in applying for membership to this. This advisory committee, pardon the oversight there, is the two terms you get next to my head, is intended to provide educational equity impacts on policy decisions to the board, experiences of underserved student groups, situations that impact underrepresented students, address the larger district-wide climate, and additional topics to educational equity that impact the student experience in the group, in the district. And by the law itself, it must be composed of members of those underrepresented groups or people who represent them. So it can be students, staff, family members, and community members who work with those groups.
So we are going to do an outreach to have the new members join. We want to have the communication going out in 11 languages, including English, to get the interest from the staff, parents, community members, and students. And we're going to do outreach to those communities as well. So we're looking into other ways, not just a message sent. As Pat mentioned, the group is going to be constituted with foreign members that still want to serve and can apply again. And the superintendent is the one who recommends, and you and board members decide and appoint those members to serve in the Equity Advisory Committee. We have developed an application, and we have a rubric that was put together in collaboration with equity directors from the state. And as was mentioned before, this is going to be a group that primarily represents underserved groups in the district. So staff superintendent will be coming back to the school board at a later date this fall with a recommendation of committee members to appoint. We look forward to more discussion about this when that comes.
Just to clarify really quick, this is a Division 22 requirement as well, that the state actually spoke to the deputy director, used to call her deputy superintendent, the director here in Oregon. And she just let me know that it's a Division 22. We can just make sure that we have a plan of action for any correction for this year and full implementation in 23-24. What are the requirements to have an equity committee member on the budget team? So we have a year from now to be able to, again, make the correction. So this year we can be status quo, and we do have Mr. Schofield that's going to come in and present. So we have a year to be able to do that as well. So it gives us a little bit of leeway, as this is, again, the first year. So thank you for your presentation.
Questions, Becky?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was just looking, the information that's in our packet here is a little bit different than the information that was up there as far as criteria. Can you just explain me who is exactly the point person that will be making the decision of who serves on this committee? Whose responsibility and accountability is it to make that decision?
It is the superintendent's responsibility to oversee a nomination process or application process and to recommend to the board candidates for consideration for appointment. And it is the board's responsibility to appoint members to the committee and to ensure that they are indeed representing and elevating underserved voices in our community. So that will require a board action at that time.
So will we be given, like, these are the people that all applied and somebody will be doing? No, okay.
I will provide a slate for the board for consideration, and we will get that internally with staff. That's per the ODE when talking to department, that's what boards or what districts are doing.
That all of those applications will be, public record.
There will be, if we have all applications in public record.
So if they're public record, it could easily be shared with us as a board.
If the board would like the public record, yes.
It's my understanding, I'm gonna just jump in here, so there's gonna be some selection criteria. So that when those decisions are made, that they're not, there's a criteria that can be looked at it, and a modicum of fairness is brought to the process, if that's a concern.
I just know whether it be our budget committee or our bond accountability, whatever it is that we are asking the public to apply for. It's not always, extremely transparent of who's applied and how it's something was based upon. So I just want to make sure that that process is very much lined out and that people that do apply hear back from us and know why they will not, go on to the next step, just those kind of things.
Yeah, and this is the first year of this requirement, so again, it will get better. Again, this is why we've asked for the extension from ODE to have a more inclusive process to ensure that we have clear representation, more proportionality, and actually more student and community voice than had been there previously. But again, we can make adjustments as a board, which is, again, I think per ODE, it's advisory. We have a clear, as long as the process is completely solid and we can stick to the process is solid and ensure that, the names brought in, staff would vet the names, bring forward a recommendation for me that I want to look at and say, this is bring to the board.
I just don't want to put the board in a position that we are being lobbied and not know all the criteria, that sort of thing. And when we are going to be the ultimate choosers of that could be a place that you put the board in.
Yes, we'll make sure that we have that criteria in front of the board. More than,
Ghana and then Sunita. Or, sorry. Yeah, go in, sorry. Then did you have your hand up before? Ogana, then Karen, and Sunita, okay.
So my question is, because under the Equitable Policies Task Force, we have board representation in that committee. So does it mean that board members are not eligible to be on this new committee?
That's correct. It's actually explicitly laid out in the requirements for school districts that the superintendent and current members of the board cannot be appointed to the committee. However, any board members who are interested in viewing the work of the committee are always welcome to do so when that gets started. Thank you.
And I'm gonna just jump in on a variation with that question. While we're transitioning to the Senate Bill 732 compliant committee, will you be having board members on the transition committee, or looking to institute that practice beginning this fall?
We're looking to institute the reconstituted equity committee this fall without having a transitional time with the previous equity policy task force morphing into the new one. We're looking to do that reset this fall.
Thanks for the clarification.
And thanks to the board members who served on the previous task force.
Karen.
I know that they made some changes to Senate Bill 732. And I remember one of the key pieces before was that the superintendent chose and the board had like no say. So it was interesting to me that they made that change because from the onset, it was the idea that they would be giving us feedback and we would be in the mix of trying to choose who was going to be on there.
Right, that decision was made through the legislative process. It was originally proposed, the legislation would have had these committees appointed by the superintendent. The final version that was passed by both houses requires that the superintendent and school board be involved in that. So in the Oregon administrative rule that is put in place, lays out that the superintendent will bring forward a slate of candidates for the school board to take action on. So we do have a process about that piece, but it did evolve over time. And that I think has also potentially caused some confusion for some folks who've read one version, not another one, but that is the process going forward.
And actually, we're just received, again, word this week of additional, so it's gonna continue to morph. So I think what we see now may be different 2 years.
My last thing was, when our communities that we're trying to get onto the committee, that are required to be on the committee, come out and put their name out and share all their information. It is concerning that that is public record, for their own safety, knowing, in different parts of our state and in our town. So that's, and I know that it'll be, public noticed as well, so the meeting will be public noticed, and, so just putting that out there.
As this will be a committee that is advisory to the school board as well as to the superintendent, they will be public meetings going forward. The public will be able to view them, and that's absolutely right. They'll be noticed, they'll be open to the public to view, and certainly all those considerations are really important to keep in mind, as is people's information when they're submitting it to the district.
Sunita, I think you got our last question here.
Thank you. Since this new regulation says that board member or the superintendent is not part of this committee, is there a requirement for presenting to the board? How often will you be presenting to the board?
There is not a requirement that the equity committee be presenting to the board. It is an option for the equity advisory committee to develop an annual report addressing some topics that they've looked at, data, experiences, and it is an option for the equity committee to have a liaison report to the board as well. So we'll be looking at that as we structure the committee going forward. There are many things that are laid out clearly in the ORS and the OAR. That is not a requirement, but it is certainly a possibility.
I think as a board member, it would be nice to find out what's going on in this community so that everybody, I know that we can do it too, but it can hear from it.
Just really quickly, so this committee really makes up their own charter. So this committee, to the point of the board, this committee is really gonna be a self-serving charter committee that's made up of community, that meets with staff. And again, whatever is decided, I think it's gonna be, it's a new endeavor in the state of Oregon. It's a new endeavor. We've had in previous district I worked in Oregon, an equity committee for 20 years. So but this is something that's new territory in terms of how we train folks. I think it's a really neat opportunity for the community to be involved. And also I do hope that we are able to delve into some training with this committee to ensure that they understand, again, the nuances of Oregon public education, but also, again, they'll create their own charter, and again, I'm pretty sure they would want to come in and talk to the board. So I'm pretty sure they would. And I think we can make a suggestion, because I think it'd be good to have that dialogue with the school board in terms of what they see, what data sets they want to look at, it, why the endeavor to take the work that they're going to be doing.
a number of school boards, county commissioners, city councils. And so we have deep expertise of every decade in engaging with local governments, special districts to draw boundaries that they are contiguous, they are balanced by population, and that we take into account other considerations as directed by the board and by statute. So what we're looking at after the 2020 census was the release of a redistricting data file that the Census Bureau publishes to aid governments in this process of the past few decades. That's the only piece of census data we have so far from the 2020 census. So one of the things that I think that the board should be aware of is that we'll be limited to some extent in the kind of characteristics that we can look at. Typically at this point, this many years after census would have a little bit more demographic data than we have at this time. So I have, I think you'll have a number of slides. I haven't seen all of them, but I can try and talk you through what you're seeing here, unless Steve, that was your plan. Do you want to? Please, if you could advance the slide. Okay. There we go. Okay. Great. So now that you have, I guess, a sense of what the project is intended to accomplish, I can get a little bit into our workflow and what we plan to bring back to you in the next few months. So we different groups we work with have a different engagement process that they bring to the redistricting project. Sometimes there'll be an extensive community engagement process to hear from people what kind of considerations they think should be taken into account. But other times it can be very expeditious process, and we can kind of get through with a month or two based on just following the guidelines the Secretary of State has published, as well as the census data that we have. So what we have proposed to do is to bring two alternatives before the board, one of which is a kind of status quo. We maintain existing boundaries as closely as possible. We make a set of minimal changes as required to bring the board zones into balance and into compliance with the law if necessary. And then a second one that's used for some bigger picture thinking. So one of the things we've done sometimes is to look if there are mismatches between school attendance zones and board zones, and to offer an alternative which more neatly nests school attendance zones into board zones. So I think given the design as it exists right now, that's probably not a clear consideration in Beaverton as it is in the other places we've looked at. So we can do other things. We can think about maybe if we were to redraw zones according to neighborhoods, or according to age of housing, maybe rental neighborhoods, or you can look at a number of different things. Language is spoken, and we can offer an alternative which can be used for deliberation and consideration. And when those two alternatives are developed, that's not kind of the end of the story. We can also go back and make further changes based on feedback from the board on those two alternatives. And then ultimately, we'll find a preferred alternative and turn into your report that has a description of those board zones as well as a map. Those will go to the county elections office, where it will be used to redraw precincts if necessary. That's one thing I didn't, which is that we often will try to use the existing voting precincts to just reduce the burden on the county GIS office in advance of the next election. But depending on what the timeline is, the county GIS that may take as much as a year until precincts can be updated and until that would have any impact on any election. So it's one thing to be mindful of too.
Questions from the clerk? I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, you jumped right to where I was going.
Okay, great. Questions from, so I see Susan, then Eric, then Becky.
I bet we all three have the same question. That is the fact that there's 3 school board members that are up for election this year. And I'm thinking that the boundary change is very much going to impact elections and potentially could impact people that are in particular zones. So the timeline is what I'm concerned about.
Depending on the discussion we have here tonight and the direction that you provide to us, our goal is to have this back to you for a presentation this winter, hopefully having adoption by December or January.
So Steve, just to follow up, would that allow a timeline in which people could be informed of the zones that they'll be running for, and it would take effect on July 1st, 2023?
We've had preliminary conversations with the county elections office. They assure us that this can be done relatively swiftly.
So as soon, so just to make sure I got the logistics right, the board would deliberate on this, and we come out with the zones that we would like to see based on what the consultant comes forward with. Then as soon as that decision's been made, it can go out publicly, people can be aware of that. And then the county will run the next election based on those zones, and those zones will come into effect when new board members or whoever is elected for the, basically they come into their office on July 1st, 2023.
Right. I'm not qualified to answer election law questions, but generally speaking, that's my understanding of how it would work. Yes.
Okay.
So looking, I mean, you're giving us two options to discuss in terms of how to go forward in terms of the zone boundary changes, is that correct? One is not really changing it at all, and the other one is being more.
For our purposes, yes, the option one will be to do as minimal of changes to the boundaries and get as close to a balance the number of people in each zone. And we will also take a much broader look and looking at, as Dr. Shigan has described, you know, the neighborhoods, the attendance areas, and other factors that can kind of create a, I don't want to call it a sense of community, but that, you know, a zone that makes, you know, a sense for a community.
So I guess my question is, tonight, you're asking us to direct one way or the other? I'm not quite sure. I'm not.
No, we're asking you right this evening is if you have factors you want us to consider, that would be, this is the time to do that. At our next meeting, when we have drafts to share with you, then you'll be able to look and deliberate on, have we done it correctly? Do we need to do it more? Do we need to think differently? Have we nailed it? We just need to, you know, get some preliminary direction on how you would like us to assess those zones.
So before we go any further, just 1 second. It's important, so tonight is about getting clear about what factors are important for us, right? We're not necessarily outcome driven in this process. We're looking at it in terms of what factors are important for us as a board when we're making this decision, right? There could be a number of different outcomes from this, but how do we want these boundaries drawn on what, and let me throw out some different things, right? So maybe Ethan, I think you could describe the factors and you just did, but the K-12 experience, we want it to be contiguous with the school catchment areas. That's one thing. How do we look at our demographic data, languages spoken? All of those things can be factored in creating a different zone or boundary, right? And the question before us tonight as a board, what are our values? What are the values that we want to see put into place? Then they'll come back, they'll crunch the numbers, and they'll bring us the final product, and we'll take a look at that. But the important thing is that we're impartial to this process, which means that we're looking at a set of values that we want to see enacted, not a specific outcome.
Just a little, I'm glad we're having this discussion. I wish I had, you know, in terms of looking at all of this, more time to think about what our, you know, values are. So like, I'm just reading this and I read my packet and I don't think I got the vibe that that's what we were going to be doing this evening, is coming up with, you know, what our guidelines would be or what we would like to have in there. So I'm not sure I'm prepared.
If I may,
Right, I'd say this is a living process, but you don't have to be on the spot and decide, you know, and give me a memo at the end of the meeting. I think it's an experience that a lot of people will have that kind of will be caught blindsided by the different options that are available. So it is iterative process, and I do expect that, you know, we will have communications that can come from the board as there's time in those working sessions or a future session. That can be communicated and make their way through.
If we were to come back in September and revisit this, would you still have enough time to be able to crunch the numbers on the boundaries and things like that for an implementation date in January?
I think so, yeah, depending on how complex the criteria are and what kind of engagement process there is. But I think that if we're talking about, you know, a set of good criteria which are available in the census data that we have, and which we can justify and lay out in our report, and we could, you know, bring before you those two proposals which meet those two criteria still on this timeline. Yeah. We have crunch numbers, I should say, also for the existing boundaries, so we know which ones will need adjustments and how much.
Gotcha. That could give us more time as a board to think about the factors. If what I'm hearing from board members is you need more time to be able to think about the factors, we can learn about some of the factors tonight and maybe come back in September and put forward a list of factors for you to take a look at.
Yes, and I think one thing I would caution though is not to ask too much of this rezoning process, because they are at large zones. It is a really different kind of ballgame than zone elections. Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand.
Sorry, I didn't mean to add complexity to this. I'm just trying to understand what our charge is here. So, I mean, I'm not trying to add extra work.
So I think we've got Eric and then Becky, and then I saw Corinne, you had your hand up.
Mine was just mostly a question, like clarification, but this is not about attendance, areas. It's not an attendance change. This is all about the zonal change for 7 board members.
That's correct.
And then I have one more thought. I mean, like, I guess, we can all add later on, but like for me, when I went to the board, and obviously a passion led by high school and the whole hinterland around this. So, obviously we only have like 7 board members and 6 comprehensive huge high schools. So, I mean, at least for me, the passion was, that area. And of course, we're large. So like, my passion extends to everybody else's area too. So, and I'm sure people have different ideas too.
Becky?
I didn't follow this process 10 years ago when I wasn't on the school board. I guess I'm just was very concerned about the timeline, and I did not, that was news to me about that it needs to go back to Washington County elections and in approval. So I want to make sure I understand, this is going to come to us and we are going to vote on a plan that we voted up or down, correct?
That is correct.
So we know, for those of us that have been on the board during boundary processes or other things, when we give criteria, like we have done here, sometimes that criteria bumps up against each other. And is there a focus of a depth chart here? We're trying to cover this priority first. And I would say probably what we're trying to cover first is to make it reflect our demographics of we have some zones that have too many and have too less. And that's the number one thing, is we're trying to make that more equal. I'm not going to say, this isn't an equity issue, this is an equalization process. I worry about the different steps in the timeline. That we do have 3 seats that are going to be up this next May. And if this is not approved until January, I believe people have to declare themselves by March. And we're going to need to educate people and bring them along on if there are some changes, because they already have a hard time figuring out where they live, and they just look at the schools we represent. So I am one, I want to do it correctly the best we can. I believe the criteria you set out is a great place to start. I personally do not need until September. I would just assume let this process get started so that we can get this going, because I think what makes much more sense is how we're gonna have to bring our public and communicate this to our community, so that we can start recruiting candidates. And January to me is just too late, when people have to make a decision up by March. So that's my 2 cents.
Right.
Already forgot my question after, but no, I think, I appreciate, I wanna know, like, if we're gonna change something completely, change something upside down, then it would be great to have some examples of maybe districts that have done that, and what were they basing those decisions on, like, what criteria were they using to make this more equitable, or for whatever criteria they might use, so that would be helpful to me. At the same time, I have appreciated that piece of having a high school and the schools around it to be kind of responsible for, because then when we visit the schools, we kind of know who, it becomes our, like, even though we're responsible for everybody, but we know where, the kids, come from this middle elementary and they go to this middle school, and then that's all in one zone. It helps us bring that community together in that zone and think about that zone in that way. But I'm curious to know, what other districts, if somebody has done it and figured this puzzle out and made it this amazing equitable zoning thing, I would love to see an example of that, just because we have pockets of poverty in kind of different areas of Beaverton. So if we're looking at, or you were mentioning apartment complexes or something, or there are pockets in almost every one of our zones, or students experiencing homelessness, or so I would just be interested in seeing some examples of maybe somebody that's figured this out in a totally different way. But if we want to move forward on the one that's just kind of rezoning it so that we have the even numbers, if we can get that one moving, I don't know if that would be something to put forth so that we have something to look at.
So it's clearly the most direct path is to follow the Secretary of State's criteria. And that is essentially, balance, be contiguous, not divide communities of common interest, be connected by transportation links, and be of an equal population. Those are the basics. Now, as you mentioned, the situations of our poverty in the district, I would caution that because they are in specific locations, to create zones that would have kind of an equal representation, you would have very serpentine gerrymandered zones that would not be easily identifiable in talking to your constituents. But that's certainly something we can take a look at and see if we can, as you say, crack that nut.
I'm not saying that's what we need to do. I'm just saying so to me, what it makes sense is to, before knowing all the other pieces that you asked, was to just kind of move them so that we have even numbers. That's what we were asked to do.
Right.
And that seems to me a way that we're not messing around with people thinking that we're trying to do something, like that, favoring one person or another, one area or another. But we're just really trying to do what they've asked us to do, which is get the numbers kind of even. That's what we were tasked to do, but I'm open to something totally different if other people are, or I don't know. I don't know enough to.
I'm gonna throw out a suggestion here, just to see what board members think, and I'm speaking here just as one board member. To me, having continuous, or how do I put this? Having zones that are as contiguous as possible with the catchment areas really helps with communication with the community. People see us as representatives of these specific schools, and when our zones don't match the catchment areas, they're confused. And then people who are running for election, right? And when you're running for election as a school board member, it's a really grassroots level, right? Or, they're confused, like, well, my kid's school is in my zone, but I'm not in the zone, right? And that confuses people. That makes it hard for people running at a grassroots level. So, and I hear what you're saying, Becky, because we have a tight timeline here. We want to communicate out to our community what these zones are going to look like, so that people know when this election is coming up, what to expect, right? One of the things we want to do is provide consistency and clear communication to our community. So people who want to come up and step up and do this work, and we know it's great, you know, we need lots of great people to do this work, you know. We want to be able to communicate clearly with them. So what I'm thinking here would be creating, you know, a package that is what Ethan, you were talking about, which is just kind of the straight ahead package. And then showing us another package where we could get more contiguous with the catchment areas of our schools and bringing those in front of the board. I think there are limited enough criteria that it's not gonna totally take you 2 months to crunch the numbers. And I actually think it would be of value to the community, and we could do something like that in a timely manner, to your point, Becky, so that we could communicate to our community ahead of this election. So I'm putting that together as a proposal to the board to think about. And Becky?
I just want to get something confirmed as well. It is the job here to look at 7 zones and make them equal. Is it the PSU's job, long-range planning job, to actually assign schools? Because the school board has gone in the past, when we have opened up a new school or whatever, we just decided amongst ourselves, oh, we take one high school, we move it over here, we've got one middle school, we move over here. Isn't it just your job to put the boundaries down for streets and zones and that sort of thing? And what schools belong to each zone is our job.
That's right, and because over the course of a decade, things will slowly drift away, so we'll be all set and right for 2020, but that, you know, certainly things will change, there'll be some attendance and tweaks, but the picture will kind of stay, you know, roughly in shape until the next decade and be adjusted again. But yes, we did exactly this plan for a neighboring school district, and it worked very well. They were great use of those alternatives. And
So then maybe if you come back to us in September, October, what would be the timeline if those are the 2 options?
Yes. I think we need to caucus with our consultant on his workload and ability to perform in a manner that will be, you know, effective for the board. If we can do it in September and October, we will. But let us caucus, and we will work with Dr. Valderas and bring that to you as soon as we can.
Great. Just know that of value to the board is getting there before January, so people can have that understanding. However, you know, that plays out. I understand you have workload issues. And maybe the last thing I want to just put out there too. Does this rezoning happen with the census? Then every time the census happens, then it triggers the potential for rezoning.
That's correct.
Okay, and do people ever, in your experience, set zones up so that the growth patterns match the zones so that over time they don't get as far out of whack?
It's unique here in the Portland metro area because of the metro decision-making with the urban growth boundary. So it's a little bit kind of disjointed that way. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're pretty much a built-out community. We don't have any real growth boundary expansion areas here. There's a few minor ones, but if that's something that would be that we can say with any certainty, there will be development coming. Well, just as an example, down in the South Beaver Mountain area, you know, there's that development going on right now. It's not fully complete, but we can predict that because there are 3,000 units that have been entitled there, there's going to be population that we can plan accordingly.
So just before we move off of this item, I want to make it clear to the board what I think is going to happen next. So if anybody has any comments, concerns, anything, they can speak to that right now. But the consultant's going to be coming back to us sometime in the fall with 2 maps. One would just be adjusting it based on population, and the other would be looking at the catchment area so that it's more continuous with the school. Anita?
where do you find out what is the number of documents you don't have?
We have calculated that. We can share that with you, but we have to put a big proviso on it because the population of the census tracts do not match the school boundary order. So there is some estimation that we need to do on those in those census tracts where the boundary, the Beaver School District boundary splits that zone, but we can provide you with that estimate.
Wasn't there some numbers provided to us in our work?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a memo, but I think what Steve is telling us is that those might not be exact numbers.
And tomorrow they wouldn't be exact numbers. I mean,
Right, exactly.
We have this table, but again, we'll write up the major qualifications, the rock of salt that goes to take with this.
So can you just let her know what the numbers are right now? I think like 46,000 or something.
Absolutely. Our total population in the district is estimated at 288,947. And we're trying to have as a target approximately 41,000 population in each zone. I can give you our numbers for each zone right now.
Maybe we can get a reply on by email.
Okay, I will do that post haste.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Interesting discussion, and we're excited to see where we go from here with that. And good luck to you, Ethan. There's a lot of numbers to find.
So just really quick, before we get off that subject, I've done this in every district I've worked in, just to make sure the community understands, this is not a boundary change for schools, this is the director boundary change. The director boundary change, this does not impact kids and where they live. Right.
Please say that another 3 times.
Also, I think it's important to mention that the elections are at large, so the zone determines where the board member has to be a resident of, but not who you can vote for.
Great point, Saul. Okay, we're gonna move on to action items here. We have the consent agenda in front of us. Do I hear a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I'm so happy to be doing this in person. I move that we adopt the consent agenda.
I will second the motion.
It has been properly moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda. Board members will answer with aye, nay, or abstain when I call their names. Susan Greenberg,
Aye.
Savannah Perez,
Aye.
Eric Simpson,
Aye.
Danita Gard,
Aye.
Sugana Ananaya,
Aye.
Becky Finchak, Colette is aye, and the motion passes unanimously. We will now move on to board communication. Board members have any comments tonight? Becky?
Last week, the Legislative Policy Committee of the Oregon School Board Association met, and I just want to get this going, and you're going to hear me say it every month. We need to be paying very close attention to what the legislature is going to do in funding schools coming up. And we need to be communicating with our legislators wherever we may come across them about what our current service level is, what kind of monies we need for our students so that they are successful and thriving. And it is going to be our job as a school board to be helping our community understand that, and definitely our legislators to understand that. And there are lots and lots of things that the legislature has to fund. There are lots and lots of needs, whether they be mental health or houselessness. But because they financed, and we were a very big part of that, of the Student Success Act, we do not get to take our foot off the gas. This has got to be a priority, and we need to understand it, and we need to be talking in numbers so that every single time we are on message with our community and with our legislators of how important it is to fund schools at least at the current service level. I won't even hope and pray for the QEM, but at least the current service level. So you're gonna hear me say this over and over again between now and next spring of how important this is as a school board that we take this issue on.
I just want to make sure that we have the current service level numbers and that maybe Mike can supply us with that so that what we're talking in educated terms.
Comments from the board? Correct.
First I wanted to thank Vanessa Vasquez for amazing summer school and organizing that for us, in the district. I think, it was a great hire, and he's been putting a lot of energy and did a phenomenal job. As we visited the summer schools, it was just amazing, and to see how happy our teachers were and to see how happy the kids were with all the different, options for learning for the students, and the staff were just happy. And, thank you to the teachers who served during our summer school and not just the teachers, but all of our staff. I also wanted to thank HR for all of the hiring. That's a lot of people to hire. So thank you to Susan, and the whole HR staff. And for putting on the new teacher academy. It was great to see all our new teachers. And just excited to see how we're going to be supporting them and helping them thrive. They are the backbone of our education system, and they are the people that are helping our children really thrive. And so with that said, we have a levy that we are all working. Sunita and I are heading up the levy committee, or levy work, I guess, and the whole board is actually helping out. And we want to make sure that our community knows the importance of our teachers and the need for everybody to turn over that ballot and vote yes for our teachers. That's over 280 teaching positions that are crucial to our district. With the economy going, we don't know where it's going. And it's a renewal. We know we want to respect the finances of our community and be good fiscal stewards of that money. And we are very thankful to our community for having passed the levy in the past, but we really need everybody's support. I know I have students reaching out that want to help. We have a website, yesforbeavertonschools.org. And you can go there to volunteer, you can go there to donate. We need donations to help us get information out to our community about our teachers and the need for this levy to pass. We also, I wanted to say that, there's no more than, gosh, I forgot my last point. I'm really excited about this levy, and we need everybody's support, and it's a lot of hours, volunteer time. So I'll pass it on maybe to Sunita to keep adding to the levy work, if that's okay.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. First of all, it's really nice to be in person, being able to see everyone, and the legislative work that Becky was talking about is really, really important. And as a follow-up, teachers are very important. And the one thing that most of the points Karen covered it, and that's really great, is that we really need to make sure that people know who wants to support that bond pays for the capital improvements and the teachers levy pays for the teachers. And it's really, really important to know that, because without this levy, we might lose 280 positions. And that's not just in one school, it's in all schools. And you can see that information on our website. And Yes for Beaverton website is up and running. And you can go there and see how you can help, how you can volunteer, support, donate. And if you have any questions, if you want to come and help us, Karen and I will be very happy to discuss with you if you want to talk about how you want to support this levy, because it's really, really important for our schools and for our students. Thank you very much.
Just one piece, the website is yesforbeavertonschools.org. So again, you can donate there, you can volunteer there, and reach out if you have any questions. And I think what you said was key, that bonds pay for buildings and levies pay for teachers. Yes, we passed the bond, but now we gotta pass the teacher levy.
Other comments from the board? Okay, well, I just want to say I was clapping along in my head to what you said earlier, Becky, absolutely. And also Sunita and all the work with the levy, and what it comes down to is this is a big year for our budget. You know, we've got the state that's going to determine what that budget looks like for the next 2 years, and we've got to make our case with the voters to make sure that we maintain the teaching staff that we currently have through the levy. So lots of work to be done and some big challenges, but I think some opportunities here to do some advocacy and to make a huge difference in what this district does when we look at our next budget in the spring. And I'm excited. We've got the school year just about on us, right? That's going to be starting next week. That's unbelievable. I hope everybody's gotten some rest. These have been some difficult years over the last year. And I'm really hopeful that everybody's coming back rested and ready for another great school year. And I guess I'll just end by saying how grateful I am to be working with Dr. Balderas. This has been an amazing summer. Dr. Balderas has hit the ground running for our community, for our kids, for our teachers, and our staff. And he's got a great entry plan. He's already got meetings scheduled to do outreach. And I am very excited for what's to come in our strategic planning as well, because I think that'll be the result of some really great work with this board and superintendent. And with that, I'm going to adjourn our meeting and I hope everybody enjoys their night.